Hey, welcome to the Delivering Value podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Kaplan, and in this show, I chat with folks who work in SaaS to hear about their career journeys and explore the hardest moments along the way. My guest today is Amanda Natividad. Amanda is the VP of Marketing at Sparktoro and previously led marketing teams for Growth Machine, Liftopia, Fitbit, and NatureBox. In this episode, Amanda expands on some of the low points in her career. We talked about some of the toughest feedback that she's received, how she works through burnout, and how she's been able to find her authentic voice as a leader. We even touched on the role of hypnotherapy in our lives. We covered a ton of ground in this episode, and I think you're going to love it. Let's go ahead and jump right in. I'm a fan of yours. I'm a fan of Sparktoro. And what I have observed is that you kind of have an authenticity and a realness in your content, which I also really respect and admire.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. It's something that I don't think consciously about often, but it's something that's really important to me to just make sure that what I say comes from a very true, authentic place.
And I wanted to know a little bit about this because, candidly, I have invited other folks on the show that have similar level of influence, right? You have around 200,000 followers across LinkedIn and Twitter. And I have invited folks on the show that have around similar followings who weren't willing to come on and to be vulnerable and to share some of their speed bumps and adversity. And I'm curious for you, has that gotten harder as there's been more eyeballs and more attention?
So I don't know if it's gotten harder so much as it is. Maybe now I think more about potential people that can be involved, like whatever experience I'm sharing. How am I conveying the other person? Because I do want to be conscious of if I'm telling a story that involves like me or somebody else in my story, right, messing up. I do want to be careful about making sure that I'm representing everybody in a fair way, right? Because the last thing I ever want to do is bring someone, even if they're unnamed, right? The last thing I want to do is bring someone into this conversation in a way that it doesn't allow them to defend themselves. If that makes any sense, right? It's not like I talk about anything really like embarrassing or spicy or really terrible, but it's more of just being mindful about anybody else that's involved and making sure, like, I don't know, because they heard the story. Again, I'm not mentioning names, but if they heard something and felt like it might have been them that I'm referring to, would they feel slighted in any way? So I just try to be very mindful about that.
That makes sense. So even with that, even with the mindfulness, I would still say, these are my words, not yours, that it takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable and to share some of your speed bumps along the way. Where does that come from with you?
So as I've come up in marketing just throughout my career, I first started out in a very non-traditional path, right? I didn't study marketing in school. I got into content marketing by way of journalism. So my first professional experience really was in journalism. And I just pivoted and found my way into marketing. And so a lot of what I've done has been self-taught or just through mentors and stuff. And along the way, I've tried to find one-sided mentors, people whose work I could follow, learn from. And I think it was just that when you think of the kind of stereotypical thought leader, and there are a lot of those, when I found their content, I just didn't really understand it. Like, not really. Yeah, I would understand their sentences and everything. What I just mean is there were dots that were not connecting for me where I just thought, like, how could you be so sure of this thing? Or this doesn't apply to everybody, does it? Like, why do these things seem so black and white? And I found that the people that I learned from that like truly understood were the people who weren't afraid of nuance or who weren't afraid to share their ups and downs. And those are the people that I trusted because I was like, oh, okay, this person isn't afraid to be wrong or seem like an idiot sometimes. Like that's somebody I can learn from because I trust them. I see that they've learned from mistakes. I see that they've experienced like the low lows. I can learn from that. Not from the people who seem like they have it all together all the time.
I'm so skeptical of the people that seem to have it all figured out because that just hasn't been my journey either. And so I'm curious as you share that, is there somebody you're picturing in your mind? Like if we could rewind back a couple of years, is there somebody that you used to look up to or follow or admire from a distance that you're kind of picturing in your head as you share that?
It kind of has to be Rand Fishkin, my current boss. He is one of the very few people who is just incredibly vulnerable and very open about his ups and downs. And I think it's part of what just makes him just stand a test of time, where years later, like from his earlier days in Moz to now, Like he still is one of the top marketers that we could all look up to. And I think it's because he's developed this true longevity in his career because he's so transparent about everything, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And I would agree. I feel like Rand, he's a legend in the marketing space. And I have to ask this. So you brought up Rand. Is it ever challenging to work for a boss like Rand, who has such cachet and admiration in the space and so much marketing knowledge himself? Does that ever provide challenges for you? I coach folks and I mentor folks who work in tech. One of the most difficult challenges that I've encountered are folks that work for influencers, folks that have big outsized audiences and a lot of admiration. And sometimes that creates a weight to their opinions. And even if they're in the meeting, sometimes their presence can have a little bit of weight. And it can be hard to carve your own lane as someone who's trying to establish themselves and to do impactful work. And so I'm curious if any part of that story resonates and how you think about it, how you navigate it.
Yeah, that's a really good consideration. So for that specifically, I have to say that Rand is really good at stating when he has a strong opinion versus when he doesn't have as much of a strong opinion, right? Where he's good at saying like, hey, this is just my opinion. Maybe you disagree. Happy to go with what you think. And that's when I can feel more like, all right, I really believe in this opinion that I have. Or that helps me kind of know like, all right, I'm going to pump the brakes a little bit. I think he's right. I'm going to follow his lead. So that helps. I think two other implications or other issues that can be difficult in working with Rand. So one is sometimes, or there are many times in which I've put the bar too high for myself. Whenever possible, I like to have Rand review my blog posts before I publish them, just because I think it's a good best practice, right? Make sure you're aligned with the folks at the company before you publish something. And I think earlier on, I got in my head a little bit too much about this because I would be self-conscious about, I mean, Rand Fishkin's going to read my blog post. It has to be perfect. But he's been really good about being like, just right. It's okay. Just right. Just say the thing you need to say. And I can flag to him now like, hey, this blog post is boring. You don't have to read it, but I'm going to publish it tonight. Or it's, hey, in this part and that part, I'm not really sure about how I feel about this. I'd really appreciate a good roasting here. That helps a lot. The other thing I'll say is, and this really doesn't have anything to do with Rand, it's sometimes the way other people treat me in this space. I don't think I've ever talked about this before, but one, I'll say up front, of course, working with Rand has opened up new doors for me. And of course, there have been times where he's helped to open up doors for me. There have also been other times when I've blown through doors myself, right? And I think it's important to be able to know for yourself, I made that happen. Like I did that, and give yourself that sort of kudos. But also, of course, be aware of when other people are lifting you up and be grateful for that stuff. Of course, right? I don't think anyone disagrees with this, but there are times where I meet people just at conferences, other events, networking events, who might not know me very well, who when I meet them, first thing they say is, wow, Rand really opened up a lot of doors for you. Wow, that must be nice. Or, yeah, I know you because you work with Rand Fishkin. And that happens probably more than I would like. And it does make for some pretty awkward moments in that, you know, of course, right away I'm put off by that. And I'm like, why do I want to get to know you if that's how you think of me? Geez, you can't keep that to yourself. Like, so there might be moments where I feel like I have a bit of a chip on my shoulder because of that sort of treatment. And maybe if anything, it just makes me very conscious of how I treat other people, because no matter who anyone is, look, unless someone is going out of their way to be a total jerk, no one deserves to hear that upon a first meeting. And I would say I hear that probably more than half the time.
Yikes. Right? That sucks. That sucks. I was going to ask how that feels, and you kind of already shared how it feels. That sucks when that happens. I'm sorry.
I'm happy to talk about it here or in this space. And that I think people need to be aware too. Like when you meet anybody, be aware of how you treat them. And even if you do think somebody had things handed to them or whatever, you don't have to say that to their face unless they're hurting you, right? Get to know people, ask where they're coming from. It's just, maybe I think the takeaway really is just meet people with an open mind and an open heart.
You said something a few minutes ago that I thought was really interesting. You said something like, when I'm working with Rand, I try to define and learn what's really important to him. And sometimes he'll let me know, and sometimes I'll ask him. And so I was curious to know if there has ever been a formal conversation where you said, maybe when you first started, hey, what are the things that are really important to you so that we can get into a really good rhythm together, and I can go fast on the things I can go fast on, and I can check with you and slow down on the things that I know are important to you. Did you ever have any kind of sit down chat around that kind of stuff?
No, but that's great. I think everybody needs to do that. I think that is really important. And the only reason the answer is no is that Rand and I are actually very similar. Not even like we see the world the same way. It isn't even really that. I think it's that we make decisions in a similar way, or we approach problems similarly, even if we ultimately have a different perspective. So I think I just immediately grokked what he would want to have more feedback on, or be more prescriptive about, versus things that he would just let me do. But I will say, at the outset, like before I formally joined Sparktoro, before I joined Sparktoro, when I met him and Casey, our CTO, I talked to them in detail about the things that were important for them, for the business, for the product, for our customers. So I did go into the role with a very clear understanding of the problems that kept them up at night. Because of that, I was able to just immediately identify projects and opportunities that would help us address some of those issues. Things like making sure customers are getting really good value out of the product, making sure they're getting to value realization more quickly, doing things to help them not churn to the degree that we want to help that, right? Because we also understand sometimes we can be kind of a one and done tool where somebody's going to cancel after 2 months and then be like, great, I'll come back next year. And that's fine. Like, yeah, we want to help reduce that. But on the other hand, if that's what somebody wants to do, then that's what they want to do. That's fine.
And so it sounds like not a formal conversation, but a lot of informal conversations. And it sounds like you've kind of gotten to a place where it's more of a shorthand. And so that works for you, even though there's nothing that's been written down or no kind of first one-on-one type conversation, which is what I was curious about.
Yeah. And I think part of it, right, is like, because I've already had a lot of experience coming into this role, I stepped into this role at a director, VP level, but I'm also an individual contributor. It might be different if I had a lot less experience, right? If I was coming into this as a fresh manager type of leveling, then I might have more questions about how things get done or how we phrase things. I might have needed more direction on how to execute something. But because I was able to step into this role at a higher level, I felt more confident and more competent, right, at owning certain things and just being like, this is how this is done.
This episode is presented by AppQues. If you work in product-led growth, you know how important activating and engaging new accounts is. Turning new accounts into active users is critical to your success in a PLG environment, and typically why activated accounts is a North Star metric for growth teams. It's why my team spent years focused on improving our new user onboarding experience during my time at Wistia and at Postscript, and that's why I'm so excited that AppQues is sponsoring the show. They're just as passionate about helping product-led companies fix their onboarding and their retention as I am. They're the leading product onboarding and adoption platform for web and mobile apps, and they've helped over 1,500 SaaS orgs create exceptional onboarding experiences that convert new users into power users and brand advocates. So if you're looking for help activating more new accounts, head to appcues.com/value. They have a free new user onboarding audit, which is done by Romley John. He literally wrote the book on new user onboarding, and he's a close personal friend of mine. For help, head to appcues.com/value. This episode is brought to you by Natividad. We're seeing the next phase of product-led growth emerge right now. The first phase of PLG was all about using your product as a go-to-market tool. Basically creating free plans, free trials, or reverse free trials, getting new accounts to sign up, and then layering in retention and upgrade programs. It was a solid playbook. The only challenge is that the product value is hidden behind your sign-up form, which means that most of your visitors never get to see it. The next phase of PLG is all about leading with product value, creating interactive product demos, embedding them on your website, and letting people play with them, click around, and see the value before signing up. This engages way more people, which means more experience that value, more convert to your paid plans, and more become brand advocates. If you're sold on the idea, but not sure where to start, check out Natividad. Their no-code editor makes it easy to create interactive demos, and they're offering a free trial exclusively for Delivering Value listeners. Go to natividad.com/value and sign up for a free trial and see for yourself. Switching gears a little bit, you talked a little bit about your untraditional journey. I feel like there's no traditional journey into SaaS. I feel like you talk to 10 people, they're like, oh, my journey is so weird to get here. And when I look at yours, tech journalist, culinary school, nature box, Fitbit, Liftopia, growth machine, obviously Sparktoro now. You've got a successful newsletter, a lot of followers on some social channels. It would be easy, I think, for folks to listen and look at someone like you as having made it, as having all the answers, of never having challenge and speed bumps in your career. And so I'm curious if you could share maybe one of the lows in your journey.
Yeah. So I'll say, like, I've had a bunch of lows, but all for different reasons, right? Like, at various times in my career, I've been unhappy or laid off, interviewed a bunch of times at top tech companies and didn't get the job, which, a lot of different kinds of lows. But maybe the pivotal one was at the start of the pandemic, right? Like, when the pandemic started in spring 2020, I got furloughed from my job at Liftopia, right? It was a ski lift ticket company. So ski season ended early. And you know what? We didn't know where the ski industry was heading. So almost all of us at the company were furloughed and furloughed indefinitely. At the same time, that also meant that my kids' daycare closed down and we needed full-time daycare or full-time childcare. So while I was furloughed, in my personal life, I need to watch my kid all day. I need to be with my kid all day. So that was a necessity to be at home with my child. And it was also a time in the world where everybody was uncertain about the future. No one knew what was going on during the pandemic. And a couple months into it, I knew I had to find a job so that my husband and I can pay our bills. And at that point, I was basically just trying to tap into my network again, trying to find a new job, found my way to Growth Machine by way of a shared connection. And I think at this point, it was after the times I had been laid off or unhappy in roles. And I guess I had just reached the point where I was just sick of it. Like, I was sick of feeling powerless as the job seeker. And so when I joined Growth Machine, it was the opportunity to be that thought leader, right? Because as heading up marketing for an agency, I had to increase our pipeline, right? Bring in some new leads. And an agency isn't going to do this by way of running ads, right? It's like a lot of organic content, and focusing on that kind of organic content, like top of funnel, like social media, the blog, running a podcast. It became a natural opportunity to be that creator and thought leader, so to speak. And the first motivation really came from like, well, this is my job now. And then along the way, it started to feel like this also feels like a nice way to elevate myself or like elevate my profile in the space, right? And become a little bit better known. And so then my goal with creating and posting on social media became, I just didn't want to have to do a traditional job hunt ever again, right? That feeling of uploading your resume into what feels like black holes. I was just so sick of it and wanted to just create some personal leverage for myself.
So you said that I felt powerless, and I've been laid off. I've had friends that have been laid off. I've been let go. And that feeling of powerlessness sucks. And for myself, and maybe some folks who I've chatted with as well, it's changed the relationship with their employer, that feeling of powerlessness and not ever wanting to feel that way again. And sometimes it impacts how much you lean in to the next employer and how much you give and how much of the company swag you rock and how many of the coffee mugs you want to drink out of. And it changes sometimes that feeling of, hey, we're part of a family here, to, hey, this is my job and I'm going to check out and try to keep a little bit more distance between myself emotionally and my employer. And I was curious if any of that happened for you when you went through a period like that and you felt powerless.
That's a fascinating question. Okay. When you feel that powerlessness, there becomes that disconnect with your day job, right? Where you feel like powerless, but I'm also beholden to this company or to these people for like 8 hours a day. And I do think it becomes really important to really draw some personal boundaries, figure out what those boundaries are for yourself. And it also becomes really important to figure out how to prioritize. So like when I was at Growth Machine, it was still peak pandemic. We, meaning like we in general, not just we, me and my husband, but we in general didn't really know how to navigate any of it, right? We didn't know, like, are we allowed to hire for childcare? We're supposed to be in pods. We had to keep our distance. all right, let's form a pod. But wait, that person violated the rules of the pod, right? No one knew how to navigate any of this stuff. My point just being, my husband and I kept our kid at home. So we were both working full time and watching our toddler full time without really much help.
How
And
old was your toddler at this time? Sorry to
oh
interrupt
my
you.
gosh, at this time, he was 2.5. So like peak running around crazy time, right? And look, I mean, I felt very lucky to be able to spend that extra time with my child, for us to be able to be at home while still working. Like that is very much a blessing in of itself. But also, it was hard. I'll be honest with you. For about a year straight, I was pulling 12, 14-hour days, 7 days a week. And it was like working for several hours, tagging in for childcare, then going back to work because I had missed so many hours during the day. So it was really hard. And going back to priorities, like something I went to my boss at Growth Machine and was like, hey, I need some help prioritizing. I am just like working myself to the bone. I need to get a sense for what are the top like 2 to 3 things I need to do every day to make sure I'm being impactful. Can you help me prioritize? And I think that's important, even pandemic aside, right? Always knowing what your top 1 to 3 priorities are in a given day and just really making sure that you're aligned with that with your team.
And so is that one of the positive outcomes from that type of situation where you're feeling a little bit of overwhelm? You've got the family stuff, you've got the work stuff, and you just have too much going on. Is that one positive takeaway, leaning on prioritization?
Yeah, I think so. I think like learning how to self-manage and understand your own early symptoms for burnout, that's really important. Learning how to draw those boundaries as soon as you reasonably can and being very clear about them, right? Because it also with boundaries is you have to keep reinforcing them and they might also change, right? And just you got to like be very mindful of that to protect yourself, but also be very mindful that when you're working, you need to make sure you're being a good worker and making sure you're being a good colleague and making sure that you're aligned with all the key priorities.
How do you personally manage burnout?
Oh gosh. I think one thing is that I've accepted that there's a very natural sort of ebb and flow with each area of life. There are some times where it's a really busy season at Sparktoro and it's like, all right, I'm giving more of myself to this job like this week or for the next 3 weeks or whatever the time frame is. And this is where the chill work and our very strong boundaries really come in at Sparktoro. There are other days when like I just need to sleep in, go for a walk, maybe go to a movie and just chill out for a little bit and not work so hard. I definitely have those days too. And what helps is that I don't have Rand or Casey pinging me every day, like, where are you? I don't see your little green light on GChat. What's going on? They don't ask that, right? They don't do that. So I think it's really important for me personally to just understand that also there are times when I want to work extra hard. There might be a couple days in a week where I had this idea that I really want to complete. And usually it's like a blog post where like I'm working extra long or late into the evening working on a blog post. That's okay with me personally. For some people might be like, nope, absolutely not, right? I need to do my 8 hours and clock out. For me, it's sometimes I need to do 12 hours of work in a day because that's what I want to do. And that's what works for my workflow. But it also means maybe the next day I'm only doing 3 or 4 hours of work.
Yeah, so it's controlling your energy is maybe how I might think about that, where you can, it's like sometimes you just want to put all the energy into one thing and that's okay if that's work. And it sounds like other times you might spread that energy differently and have more time with the family or whatever it is, but you get to control it, at least at Sparktoro, which is really nice.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's really important, right? Like, I think for some people, maybe 8 hours a day every weekday, that works for them. And that's great. That works for you. Cool. Keep doing it. But it just doesn't work for me. And I think like maybe people who are maybe seen as productive or prolific are probably doing something quite similar, right? Managing their energy, like working extra hard at the hours in which they feel most energetic, and then sleeping extra long when they feel like they need to, or whatever it is that the rest needs to be. Because there are different kinds of rest, right?
Yeah. As a side note, I started doing self-hypnosis to get my energy right and to become like the best version and the best energetic version of myself. I heard another podcast that you, at least in the past, did some hypnotherapy. Is that something that you're still doing?
Oh my gosh, I didn't realize that I had talked about that or even that you had uncovered that. Not lately, but yeah, I was doing that maybe like once a month, once every 6 weeks for a couple years. And it was great because hypnotherapy, at least to me, is essentially personalized guided meditation. And I think we can all benefit from some meditation. But the thing with hypnotherapy is that it's like having a coach to fully guide you through it in light of the current needs that you might have or the current problems you're facing. So I think it's really helpful. It's helped me a lot.
I love it. Yeah, because I mean, we're talking about burnout and managing stress. And for me, mindfulness and meditation has been tools that have been really helpful. And just like anything, there's different seasons of your life where you have different tools, and there's even sometimes different instructors that make the tools more accessible or relatable for you or whatever. And I think you got to try all the things and figure out what works. And so for me, I felt like the last few months I was in a funk, just like not the best version of myself, having trouble breaking out of it, wasn't really sure what it was. Ended up in some version of the algorithm where I started seeing all these hypnotherapists basically in my feed. And so I started dedicating more time to explore it. And it feels to me when I come out of it, the way it feels when you have a really, really good meditation session where you weren't asleep, but you definitely weren't awake and you feel kind of warm and fuzzy and something has changed. And that's how it feels for me. And it's been a cool part of my life.
Yeah, highly recommend anyone check it out. Or even if you want to try meditation and you're having trouble with it, I think even starting out with some hypnotherapy could be really helpful.
Hell yeah. All right, I want to switch gears a little bit. So we've talked a little bit about feedback, at least when we were talking about Rand a little bit. And I was curious to explore a few things you posted on LinkedIn, if that's okay. All right, so here's what we got. So you shared two quotes I thought were really interesting around feedback. And I wanted to see if you could elaborate on the moment and what was going on without putting anybody under the bus or sharing anything that you don't feel comfortable sharing. Here's the first one. You said the hardest feedback I ever got from a manager. And then here's the quote. When you know what you're doing, it's so obvious and everything comes together and your vision shines through. But when you don't know what you're doing, it's also pretty obvious and painfully so. And I was curious if you could elaborate on that moment.
Yeah. So this was a boss from several years ago. And it was hard to hear in the moment because I was like, oh my God, is it that obvious when I'm a total moron? But it was really helpful. And it's one of those moments where like, I really felt like it's so important to be able to have a relationship with your boss where even they can feel open giving you that kind of feedback. Because I think if my boss and I were not in a good place, she wouldn't have told me that. And she really said that to help me. Even though it might have sounded harsh, she wasn't doing it to be cruel. Because after that, she was like, look, maybe for you, she's like, there's something to be said for acting as if you know what you're doing. She's like, I'm not suggesting that you fake it. Maybe there's a little bit of fake it till you make it. And so, one, it helped me kind of develop a better poker face about some things, that's for sure. But also it helped me to kind of see like, okay, if I don't know what I'm doing with something, I need to find help sooner. I can't just be like faking it till I make it in hopes that it kind of just eventually dawns on me, right? It's okay, act as if for a moment and then go dive in and figure out the answer, right? Talk to people, get other opinions, find some relevant blog posts, books, read those. I think when she said that, I saw it immediately in myself, right? It was like, I know that feeling that she's describing. Like, I know that feeling, but I didn't know anybody else saw it. So it just made me more aware of it. And it made me cognizant that it affects other people or that it impacts other people's work. So it just made me more mindful about trying to find knowledge and answers a lot more sooner.
In the manager who gave you this feedback, was your relationship to be direct with each other and to share things and to do it from a place of love and making each other better? Or was that the first piece of feedback that you got like this that caught your attention in this way?
I think it might have started because generally my approach to feedback has always been, hey, I prefer feedback to be direct and early. The times that I've gotten feedback on something, it was like, hey, that product launch that you did or that you were responsible for 2 months ago didn't go so well for these reasons. That's happened to me a couple of times, right? Where I felt that cause immediate resentment in me, where I was like, if I messed something up 2 months ago, tell me 2 months ago. Don't save it and tell me later. So I've often tried to communicate to my bosses or colleagues, hey, if something's wrong, if you have feedback for me, please try to just tell me as early as you can, because I don't want it to simmer and I don't want anyone to feel resentment towards me, right? Like if someone's holding on to that for months, I can only imagine that sort of festered in their brain, and I don't want that. So I think part of it was like establishing this relationship with my boss that was like, hey, I like feedback to be quick, early, and constructive. Let's do that.
And so was that the feedback that she shared? Was it after a specific moment, or was it more just something that she observed? Was there a meeting, or was there a presentation, or maybe a deck or a document they were working on that led to that feedback, or more just kind of slow burn?
There definitely was a project. I was working on something that needed to get done in whatever time frame it was, and I was kind of losing it. And at some point was like in this analysis paralysis sort of phase where I should have been pushing forward in some way, but I just stalled. And the project still launched on time and everything, but there was a 2-week period where nothing was getting done, and she knew it. So she was kind of referring to that, like, this just happened and I could see it. And so the feedback came on time.
Right. It still stings though, even when it's early and on time.
Yeah, it was the kind of sting that's like, I needed to hear that, because look, years later, I'm still thinking about it.
It sounds like it impacted your personal operating system and how you manage others and how you manage up. And it sounds like that was the positive takeaway here.
Totally positive. And I wish for people to be able to have a similar relationship with their own colleagues. Because I think even if it's hard to hear some tough feedback, if you have a good relationship with your boss, then you can trust that it's coming from a good place. Like, they want you to be successful. So that's why they're telling you these hard to hear truths.
You also shared something else that I'm going to read. You said, I tried being friendly and upbeat, but I was called too junior. I tried removing I think from my vocabulary, but then I was told I was too direct. Now I do whatever I want. I ask questions, I give opinions, I share my concerns, etc. I just wish it didn't take me so long to just be myself. First, congrats. That's dope to get there. And I'm curious now, how did you get to that perspective? What got you from where you started, where you're getting this feedback, trying to change who you are, trying to change how you present, probably trying more executive presence type stuff, to realizing that there's power in just being your authentic self?
Gosh, I mean, that just came from a long, long journey of just trying to fight who I was. And I look young for my age. That was part of it. I look younger than I am. And as I am getting older, it's something I'm very grateful for. But in my 20s, it didn't really do me any favors. And look, that is ageism, flat out, right? Somebody looks young and you treat them badly. But look, it's ageism, but at the same time, I had to fight through it. Like, I had to do something about it. And so I tried all kinds of things, like dressing differently. And then I just looked like a kid wearing her mom's clothes, I think. So that didn't work too well. But then I tried a lot of different things, like changing the way that I did my emails, changing the way I spoke, even just like very, very slightly lowering the register of my voice, just so that I would sound not so childlike. Like, I did all these things to try to seem older or more mature or more senior. And I think to a degree it worked, and to a degree it was helpful in structuring my emails, making sure that I wasn't writing like 4 questions back to back, but making it more like, here's my hypothesis. Here's what I think we should do. What do you think? Right? Like, I think there's something to be said for that, but it was a long journey to get to this point of I can finally just be myself. Right. And I think there are still times where that kind of bites me in the butt, where maybe I'm too open about something, or I show my cards too early. And I think there are these times, right, even now, where that makes me look more junior than I am. But my perspective on that changed was, now I'm like, you know what? Good. If you think that's a junior move, like, good. Both of us are not wasting as much time. Maybe an example, this sounds abstract. So if you're talking about a potential sponsorship or partnership where money is exchanging hands, perhaps arguably the senior thing to do would be to hold off a little bit longer until saying what your number is, how much money you want to spend or receive. But, you want to like nurture the relationship, maybe get to a couple conversations and then reveal your cards. But nowadays, for me, and I'm saying for me personally, I don't like having a lot of meetings. I don't like the poker game of this, right? Like, I don't like keeping my card close to my chest and being like, oh, what do you think? Oh, how much is your budget? Oh, it's not fun. I personally feel like it's a waste of time. So I am very likely in an email to just say, like, we are prepared to spend this much money. If that doesn't align with you, let's not continue talking. And there are many times where the person's like, nope, never mind. And sure, there could be times when someone would say, like, you should have tried to nurture that. But I'm like, I don't have time. I don't want to do that. I'd rather be doing something else. That's not my thing.
Well, first of all, I think it's really commendable. And I think it's really relatable because I think there's a point in everybody's career where somebody gives you feedback. I don't know if you got specific feedback on this or if it was more anecdotal, but in my experience, usually somebody gives you feedback that's like, hey, you need to work on your presence, your leadership presence, your executive presence. And I think there's a lot of people who struggle between being who they are and who they think they're supposed to be. And so what would your advice be to someone who's listening to this, nodding their head going, I think I'm the before version of that?
It can be valid if, okay, so maybe times when you feel like you're being an imposter or you're not doing something quite right, sometimes there's truth to that. I think one thing that's really important is to develop a strong sense of self-awareness. Because on one hand, it's like you could be selling yourself short. Or maybe there is a time when you don't actually know the answer to something, or maybe you are more junior. And for that, I'm going to say, like, it's okay. So I think we're all just trying so many times, especially in corporate America, right? We're trying so hard to posture like we know what we're doing. And sometimes it's like you need to just be honest with yourself and be like, I don't know. I don't know the answer. I don't know how to do this thing. Just be honest. And that doesn't mean you go around to all your meetings being like, I don't know what I'm doing, everyone. But it's like, admit it to yourself and then maybe just be honest about what knowledge gaps do you need to fill in order to feel more confident or in order to know what to do. There's that. I think it's also important to figure out like how to know what kinds of feedback or direction you need at any given time. And it might be something, it might be an instance where you have a meeting with your team and you're like, hey, for me, this is a brainstorming meeting right now. I'm working on this thing. I need some help, or here are some areas in which I think this is weak. Can you all give me some feedback on this? And I think sometimes even just being that direct in your needs already shows a certain kind of maturity that you're maybe hoping to convey in the first place. I guess maybe my point is trying to figure out a sense of balance of self-awareness and the pursuit of knowledge or more information.
It's cool to hear you use the word maturity. As a side note, have you read, oh gosh, what's the name of the book? Not How to Win Friends and Influence People, High Output Management with Andy Grove, where they talk about task relevant maturity?
No, but it sounds like I need to.
I think you're describing it intuitively, which is everybody thinks to be a good manager, well, a lot of people think to be a great manager, I'll just be like hands off and not micromanage people and I'll be the best boss ever. And what they lay out in the book is that to be an effective manager, whether you're managing up, managing down, or managing your peers and instructing your peers, that it comes down to an awareness of how much maturity or experience the person has solving a specific problem and then matching your management style to their level of experience. Because if you have someone that has a low level of experience, they need help. They need guidance. They have questions. They need direction. They need you to say how long it's supposed to take and what good looks like. And on the flip side, if somebody has a high level of maturity or experience, what they really need is just a brainstorm partner and someone to pick them up when they get stuck and help them problem solve. And what I heard you say is essentially you do that with your peers. Hey, if there's this thing that I don't know, I have awareness that I don't know it, I'm going to let y'all know that I don't know this thing and let's see if we can fill it in together. Here's what I need from you to help solve that thing. And that's the difference between just going to every meeting and saying, I don't know. It sounds like it's more having awareness into your own level of maturity or experience and then finding others to fill in the gaps.
Gosh, absolutely. Absolutely. And just adding to all that, like there's just so much validity to asking for help on what you think might be a basic task. Here's a good example. Earlier in my career, I would occasionally get feedback on my email style. And sure, there have been times where some managers have overstepped some boundaries or were a little harsh, sure. But at the same time, like, I think it's important to get guidance on those things like very early on. I'm not suggesting that a 40-year-old director of something should go around asking their VP to check their email draft. But like, it actually helped me a lot when I was at the sort of associate manager level to ask my then boss.
When you're learning like what it looks like to be a professional, like that kind of stuff?
Totally. I think it's so important to get help with that stuff. And I think where people could be doing themselves or their team a disservice is by not helping with that stuff. Like, okay, so I'll just finish my email example. Like there have been times earlier in my career when I've written an email that was meant to go out to cross-functional teams. That was a kind of email that was kicking off a project. So it was an important email that I would write out the draft. And I asked my boss, hey, can you look at this before I send it out? And it wasn't like I asked her to check all my drafts, but it was me recognizing, hey, this email is going out to like 3 different teams who I don't interface with on a day-to-day basis. They don't know me very well. I really want to make sure that I put my best foot forward. So I asked my boss, hey, this might seem silly, but can you look at this first? And she was like, of course, absolutely. And I think she also saw it as I'm her direct report. She wants to look good too. She's perfectly incentivized to help me with that email. Another example, this is more dicey territory, is I once worked at a place where some of us might have thought that somebody else was dressing a little inappropriately at work. And this is totally dicey, right? Because that's so personal. You can't really be getting in someone's business and saying, hey, don't dress this way. And it was sort of a couple of colleagues and I kind of used as a thought exercise with each other to be like, would you want to know if you dressed a certain way that someone else perceived to be, we'll just say negative? Would you want someone to tell you? We kind of just had this like philosophical discussion of, no, it's nobody's business, or like, it's the work that matters, not how someone dresses. But my personal opinion is I would want to get the feedback to be like, hey, I don't know there's any perfect way to give that kind of feedback. And I'd be curious, Andrew, what you think of this or how you would approach. But like, I would just want to hear like, hey, maybe you should consider wearing something else to the office because of these reasons. And you do you. I would just want someone to tell me. Because that's how I would feel. If I was doing something that looked obviously wrong to somebody else, I'd want to just hear it at the very least so I could maybe feel like, whatever, you're wrong. I'm doing this thing anyway. And then you know what? Fine. But at least I would know. I don't know. What do you think?
It's really hard. If there was a guy in the office who, the example that comes to my mind for a guy would be like, is wearing like a tank top in the office, or maybe isn't wearing shoes in the office. Like maybe they wore sandals in, but they're walking around barefoot. And some people might have opinions on that. I think as a guy, I could probably share that feedback, at least if I had a little rapport or some trust built up. I think if it's not a guy, it becomes a lot more difficult, and you have to be really, really cautious about what you say or don't say. And it becomes scarier and riskier and potentially offensive, I think, if you don't do it the right way. And there is no right way. So I think if it was a guy, I would say something. And if it was not a guy, I think I would do what you did and not say anything. And it's hard.
It's so hard. I would just want someone to tell me, but everyone's different. That's why I say, like, look, personally, I would want to know, but if someone disagreed, that's totally fair.
Yeah, that's one of those gray areas. They don't cover that in manager training. So if we could go back in time, you talked about knowledge gaps a few minutes ago. If we could go back in time, what is one skill that you wished you worked on sooner that would have been helpful in your career, and why?
I pivoted from journalism into content marketing, but I didn't learn SEO until much later. And it's funny because most content marketers, or I think classic content marketing, you start with SEO, but I just sort of went into it at a different angle. And with my journalism background, I think there have been ways that I've intuited SEO best practices just by way of journalism best practices. So there's that. And I think having the non-SEO background helped me to be an effective copywriter at times, because copywriting is different from SEO writing. It just is. But I do wish I learned it earlier on. It would have just rounded out my content knowledge better. And I don't know how it is today, but I'll say, like, years ago, the ironic problem with trying to learn SEO is that when you're Googling around looking for resources, it's the people who have gamed SEO that come up first.
Right. Not the most helpful content, just the best SEOs doing
Totally.
SEO. Yeah, totally. That's really true.
Because I didn't know SEO, my search terms were how to SEO. What is SEO? So like then the content I would see was like extremely basic. And I was like, what? I know that. And so what I needed was a 201 kind of knowledge of like, yeah, I know what it is, but I also don't know what it is. So like someone help me with this stuff. So it took me a long time to find actually helpful resources because bad SEOs have gamed it too much for the rest of us.
Yeah, SEO is going to do what SEO is going to do. What about on the softer skill side? So SEO makes sense to me as like a tactical thing. As you progress in your career, there's obviously more focus on people management and project management and empowering others and communication. I'm curious to know if there's a soft skill that stands out to you as something you wish you had prioritized sooner.
For one, public speaking. I wish I was better at that. I wish I was better at it now, but I wish I was better at it then. Yeah, that's definitely a soft skill that I still wish that I was better at it.
That's a great answer. Huge part of your job, right? The farther you get up the food chain, the more time you spend sharing and getting in front of the room and summarizing the work for other folks. Yesterday, I did another one of these with Joe Wilkinson. I don't know if you know Joe, but he's the former VP of growth at Lucid Chart. And he said, I wish I started meditating earlier. And I was like, whoa, it kind of blew my mind. And he said that as he progressed in his career, his stress grew and that he wished he had more tools to manage it. And I was like, that's a badass answer, dude.
Yeah, that totally is. That's a great answer. So that one too.
Yeah, we'll add that one in there.
Yeah.
So at this point in your career, what are your goals? Like, what are the goals for this next season of your career?
I'm not sure. I think there's a high level. There are some things I want to achieve, probably. I think maybe the goals now are really like, how can I help to make sure that Sparktoro grows in a really meaningful way? Well, one, on like the product-led growth front, I want to get better at that and make sure that we're doing these things right and making sure that we're doing this because we're reaching the right people and helping our customers get the most value out of the product. That's really important to me. I think a lot of what I'm looking for at this point, in my ripe old age, is how can I just be happy at work, in my personal life, manage my energy accordingly. I just want to be happy and make good money. That's what matters to me at this point.
Hell yeah. That feels like a good place to end. Want to be happy and make more money and find balance. Don't we all?
Yeah, it's funny. Like, if you think of it as like the bell curve of achievements, right at the bottom, you're like I just want to be happy and make good money. And at the end, it's the Jedi saying it too. I think it's that.
Well, thank you for coming on, sharing your stories, your perspectives, some of the speed bumps. For those who are for those who are listening that aren't following, where should they go to learn more and connect with you?
So you can learn more from me at, just find me on LinkedIn, Amanda Natividad. I also have my newsletter that I send out whenever I feel like it. So maybe it's once a month. That's at amandanet.com. And then, of course, check out sparktoro.com.
Thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the pod. I hope that you enjoyed the episode. If you did, the biggest gift that you could give me as a small business owner and as a content creator would be a review. You know the game. You can go on to Apple Podcasts. You can go on Spotify. Leave a review. That would help me service this content to other folks who are like you. Obviously, you should subscribe to the content if you really dug it. And if there's feedback that you have for me, folks you think I should chat with, stuff that you wish I would gloss over faster, whatever it is, I'm all ears. I work in growth. You're not going to hurt my feelings. I try to collect feedback and iterate quickly. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn at Andrew Kaplan or on Twitter at @akaplan. Otherwise, hope you enjoyed the episode, and I'll see you next show.